Hello, my darling, and welcome to today's story time. Today we are reading Three Ships in Fog by my good friend Phee Stringer. Please check him out. The links are in the description. I've also added a pirate ship sound as ambience in the background. And now, on with our story time. Three Ships in Fog. The captain of the lead vessel scratched his beard as he stared into the emptiness ahead of his ship and the other two under his command. They were en route to their mission, but had trouble with their bearings in this strange weather. The temperature had risen far too fast, and this strange fog had arrived almost at once. He could feel the nervousness of the men on board, and other commanders from the two other vessels had reported similar anxiety from the crews that they oversaw. In the previous night, a sound had been heard from horizon that none of them could explain. It had sounded like a massive wind or wave far off in the distance that had sustained for a few minutes before a metallic screeching noise. Then, silence. The captain knew when he was called to the deck that something unforeseen was going to happen. He had tried to keep calm, but dread is not easily pushed down in the quiet. There was no wind to speak of, and the almost glassy calm seemed destined to break at any moment. The crews of the ships did not have to wait long to feel their anxiety justified. An unnaturally large wave was approaching them fast. Some alarms sounded, and the captain ordered the crew to secure themselves. The gray swell of water approached from the starboard side of the three vessels. It raised them each towards the featureless sky for a few moments. The only sound, the gasps and murmurs from the nervous men as the massive wave passed beneath them. The aberrant wave then disappeared into the fog, yet to the port side of the ships. The men finally allowed their breathing to return to normal. "A sea quake, sir," the lieutenant behind him said in a way that was simultaneously a statement, a question, and a means of self-assurance. The captain slowly nodded and turned. "Contact the other ship and make sure they did not have any problems." "Aye, sir." The lieutenant turned and left. The phantom wave itself would have been enough of an event to make a good story, and the captain hoped that they could now continue on course without incident. A short time after the wave, however, when things had returned to their silence, the humidity had gotten even more stifling and the air even hotter. The peace did not last, however, as more strange sounds echoed through the sky, and swaths of shadow became visible in the clouds, despite the low visibility. There were deep, vocal qualities to the sounds the men heard from above, and then the sound of massive amounts of water once again moving quickly from somewhere unseen. "Lieutenant, we may have another one heading our way," the captain said, as the lieutenant returned from the communications area. The lieutenant nodded in understanding. "Aye, sir. I will let the other ships know that we might not be out of this, and to stay sharp." What happened next defied the captain's sense of logic. He was no stranger to open water and the unpredictable way that things could change. But what he and the crew watched was awe-inspiring. One of the shadows appeared in the clouds over the ship in the rear. Then, what could only be described as an ungodly amount of water fell from the sky over the vessel. It was more than rain. more than a freak storm, more like a water spout. Water came down like mighty falls of a high mountain cliff, only falling on the ship to the rear. The men on board the captain's vessel had to yell to be heard, although the only thing that left their lips were anguished cries as the rear ship hopelessly began to capsize under the ridiculous amount of water that blasted the boat. The crew watched helplessly as the ship turned over, exposing the hull. The captain thought he was going mad as he heard the sound of titanic, otherworldly laughter behind the white noise of the water. The onslaught from above stopped as quickly as it had started, and the shadow disappeared. The quiet again filling the empty air above the water. The two unharmed ships searched for survivors for the terrible event, but found none. Without any choice, they continued on in the fog. All the men on the two remaining ships could barely speak. The captain could not help but imagine what the last moments on the doomed vessel must have been like. Despite the heat and humidity in the air, the captain felt a chill run through his body. The lieutenant behind him kept a stern expression and had tears in his eyes. The captain could not tell if it had been minutes or hours since he watched the other ship capsize. He looked at his pocket watch, and it had stopped. Upon investigation, all of the clocks on both ships had followed suit and remained still as well. There had been a few other waves coming from various positions in the water, although none quite so large as the first. The sounds had continued from all directions as well. The captain and the rest of the sailors felt that the mysterious events had not finished with them yet. Old superstitions were being whispered about among the crews. Prayers were being made from men that had never prayed in their lives before. The next event happened with the same speed and the same seemingly merciless randomness as the previous. The captain heard a sound from the direction of the second ship. What he saw made him grip the railing and drop down to one knee. "Mother of God," he exclaimed, as the second ship, in a matter of seconds, was pulled violently under the surface of the water, crew and all. Only a few ripples of water remained where the ship once was. The men stared in disbelief at the water, one of them laughing in hysterical fear at the impossibility of what had just happened as he watched. The others either were silent or wept. The captain knew he had to say something, had to say anything to his remaining sailors, but his mouth had gone dry. His voice had vanished, just as the ship had moments ago. The captain and crew heard a scream from the starboard side of the ship. One of the sailors had apparently run off to vomit due to the fear that had been induced. His scream was not one retching or pain, though. It was terror. The captain also heard what sounded like an explosion in the water as he turned his head, dashing to the starboard side. The ship had, just moments ago, been enveloped by the water, had burst from the surface in a spray of foam. It had re-emerged in the distant fog, but still visible to the crew. The space that ship had moved, apparently under the water in the moments it had been gone, was an impossible distance to move even in a fast ship on the surface. Yet, there it was, after erupting from the water, now floating on its side. None of the men had any doubt whatsoever. The crew had perished after being pulled into the depths and then thrust to the surface by unknowable powers that surrounded them. The sailors on his ship still looked to the captain for some kind of guidance, or at least assurance. The captain's heart and mind had been replaced with horror and confusion. The sickening blanket of silence only returned for moments before a new sound came from the ship's bow and quickly filled the air. It was another sound of maddening water, this time cut with thunderous organic gurgling and rumbling. It was as if some massive beast of unfathomable size was drinking the world. "Captain," the lieutenant screamed while pointing in the direction of the sound, off the bow. A tremendous whirlpool was in the distance, sucking the waters down into the darkness below, the ship being pulled with it. The monstrous sounds continued growing in volume as the ship approached the vortex. The delirium and madness this caused made it hard to perceive the events that followed on the lone, surviving vessel. The screaming and madness, as they were pulled closer and closer to the tempest, were cut short as a shock from underneath the ship jolted all the men, several struggling to hang on to whatever solid object could be found. The bubbling, gurgling sound became much louder for a few moments before disappearing yet again. Its echo still remaining for agonizing moments before, finally, silence. The captain lay on his back, gasping to fill his lungs with air after being screamed empty from unchecked panic. When a small amount of his senses did return, the first thing he noticed was that the air temperature had grown noticeably cooler and slightly less humid, but the fog still persisted. He began to stand up with help from some of the other men. Other crew members were still in the paralysis of fear from the previous moments. The captain still managed to rasp the command to them, dry and weak from his lips. "Report." There was no answer, but the captain could tell by the askew angle that he felt when standing on the deck that they had run aground. The captain saw his men staring over the railing downward, this time not so much in fear, but in wonder. He joined his men at the railing, and a similar sensation ran through him. The ship had indeed run aground, but not due to its direction or hitting something. On the contrary, the entire sea had vanished. The ship sat in the middle of what appeared to be an endless white plain, with no wind and no movement. The other two doomed craft lay within view, too, but one lay almost entirely overturned. The other, further away, but apparently lifeless and empty. The captain verified that on all sides of the ship the same white, vast plain extended as far as the eye could see, in all directions. Still no wind or movement from anywhere. The captain and the lieutenant both knew words would be useless right now, and instead just shared a glance with one another before looking again towards the horizon. "Sir, is it over?" one of the ensigns asked the captain desperately. The captain opened his mouth to answer, but the familiar shadow from above had reappeared. The next few moments descended yet again into fear and chaos, and the ship began to move again, this time upwards into a wash of sounds and colors blurry and unknowable from all directions. The captain clung to the railing yet again, his fists bone white from his grip, his eyes shut tight, his mind once again taken over by the madness of fear. Finally, another sensation of the ship's stopping movement suddenly brought the captain out of his petrified state to open his eyes. His ship now rested in a darker place, and to the port side he saw the other two vessels that had been under his command piled atop one another. To the starboard, there was a gigantic bluish object, roughly round and spongy looking, that towered above the deck. Besides it, another object rested. The realization of what had been happening to him and his men sent a shock of understanding through his spine. The object was yellow and rubbery, with cold and lifeless eyes that stared off into nothingness. Its bill was orange and painted into its titanic rubber surface as well. The captain barely had time to react to the bafflingly large rubber duck as the lid went on the container that held them all together, plunging all into darkness. And this, my darling, ends our story time for today. Please check out Phee Sterdinger. Links are in the description. His stories are clever and insightful. As always, I hope that you have very sweet and creepy dreams.